Hey guys, if you consider yourself a libertarian like me, it's a really good chance that you come across a lot of people who simply just don't understand the fundamental belief system behind it. Most people seem to think that it's like an anarchist type system, and there's something I came across on the internet. It's actually a few months old. I just happened to see it for the first time, which was Jon Stewart's like 19 questions to libertarians. And I wanted to answer this, but before I do, most of them can be answered simply by explaining what actual libertarianism is, because some of the questions that he asks are like betray his fundamental misunderstanding of what it is. Not only that, but a kind of a skewed definition of freedom. So I want to go over both of those really quick and try not to make this video too long as I answer those 19 questions. But if you have a fundamental understanding of what freedom is and how it's defined and what libertarian philosophy actually is, then a lot of these questions don't even make sense, and I'll show you that. So basically, first let's start with freedom. What is freedom? Basically, let's look up the definition, because definitions are important. So I brought up the definition of freedom, and it just says a state of being free or at liberty rather than in confinement or under physical restraint, exemption from external control, and the power to determine action without restraint. So we see that freedom is just a lack of unnatural physical restraints on you. It's not necessarily your ability to do anything, and that's where people get confused a lot of times. Like a caveman was more free to travel the world in his time than we are now, because we have government regulating bodies, we have the TSA, you have to have passports. Just because we're able to do it better with planes and our technology doesn't mean we're more free to do so. So freedom is not necessarily an ability to do anything, it's just a lack of restraint that would stop you from doing it. So that's what freedom is. And next, what's libertarianism? Because a lot of people seem to think that libertarians hate government, we don't want any government, or something like that, which is totally ridiculous, because that's just anarchy. People who think that there shouldn't be any formal form of government are anarchists, and libertarians don't think that. And I'll say right here, the libertarians think that there has to be some form of government. The difference is that libertarians believe that form of government should be as limited as possible. It should be limited to the things that benefit everyone, that have because the government isn't necessarily a zero-sum game. Like, there's certain activities that people can involve themselves in that benefit everyone more than their individual input. Like if everyone jumps in on to buy a pizza or something, and they get a group deal, they're actually paying less per person by going in as a group than they would be just going out individually. And there's a lot of things that governments can do like this that benefit everyone more than they get more out of it than they put into it. Like a standing army. It would be very expensive for you to pay to defend yourself against foreign nations. It would probably cost as much as it does right now to raise an army, like billions of dollars. But if that same army can defend the whole country as opposed to just one person, so the individual cost is very low. And this works for like roadways, infrastructure, army, all that stuff benefits everyone more than they're putting in. So that's what government is used for. And libertarians also believe in not having the government initiate violence. They don't believe in initiation of violence. So yeah, it's not like libertarians believe we shouldn't defend ourselves against foreign invaders, but we shouldn't be invading other countries either. So that's a basic definition of libertarianism and freedom, real quick and down low and dirty. So just so we can jump into these questions, so I didn't want to drag this out too long. So the first question is government the antithesis of liberty? No. Is government itself the exact opposite and a foil to liberty? No, I just explained that government can actually enhance your life. It's supposed to be a benefit. That's why we're not anarchists. We don't believe that a total lack of government is better. So no, government is not the antithesis of liberty. 2, one of the things that enhances freedoms are roads, infrastructure enhances freedoms, a social safety net enhances freedom. Some of these are statements, not necessarily questions, but that's incorrect, because like I just explained, freedom is just a lack of external restraint. So roads don't make you any more free to travel the country, they just make you more able to travel the country efficiently and effectively. So that's just an incorrect statement based on a misunderstanding of what freedom really is. 3, what do we do with the losers that are picked by the free market? And this kind of question is just such, like, what do we do with them? That's such a totalitarian mindset. Like, you don't do anything with them. That's why it's a free market. If you're doing something with them, then it's by definition not a free market. What did we do with blacksmiths? Nothing. We didn't do anything with them. The world changes. The free market allows these things to happen slowly and over a natural course of events. We don't have to do anything with that. If a business goes out if a company goes out of business, then they sell off their assets, to another company at lower rates, and that this stuff is can actually benefit some people. So that you don't do anything with the losers in a free market. That doesn't even make any sense. Okay, 4. Do we live in a society or don't we? I would say so. Depends on your definition of society. Are we a collective? In a certain sense of the words, but not what he thinks, I don't think. Everyone's success is predicated on the hard work of all of us. Nobody gets there on their own. Why should it be that people who lose are hung out to dry? Again, this is looking at it from a totally wrong point of view. Nobody gets there on their own. That's not true. Some people do get there on their own. And like I said, the types of actions that the government should be doing are the things that do benefit everyone. That's why we want a government as opposed to anarchies, because there's herd benefits, basically. There's things that everyone can benefit from being in this group. That doesn't mean that everyone in the group should absorb the consequences of the bad decisions of a small part of that group, because then that's not a benefit to being in a group. You know what I mean? So you have to look at the things that why are we choosing to have a government and be in a group as opposed to anarchy. And it is a choice. I mean, people have to choose to do this. It shouldn't be forced upon them, and that's the whole idea. The next part of that question says, for a group that doesn't believe in evolution, it's awfully Darwinian. And for a group that doesn't believe in evolution, that doesn't even make any. I'd like to see what his source is for citing that libertarians on a whole don't believe in evolution, because certainly some of them do, but some of them don't. Some hardcore liberals don't believe in evolution, so that really doesn't make any sense. 5. In a representative democracy, we are the government. I'll agree with that. We have work to do, and we have a business to run, and we have children to raise. We elect you as our representatives to look after our interests within a democratic system. Okay, for the most part I agree with that. In a representative democracy, we do elect people to look after our interests. I don't agree with the we have children to raise and stuff like that. I think that's, if he's referring to we as a society. But for the most part, yeah, I agree with that. Representative democracy and or democratic republic, we do elect representatives to look after our own interests. Like I said, that's the whole point of government, is to enhance our lives. Otherwise, we would just be anarchists. 6. Is government inherently evil? No, government is not inherently evil. It's government isn't an entity, you know what I mean? It's just a form of structuring people's lives, a form of running a society. So no, it's not inherently evil. Like I said, we're not anarchists. All right, sometimes to protect the greater liberty, you have to do things like form an army or gather a group together to build a wall or levee. That's just a statement. That's the entirety of the statement. I don't disagree with that. Like I said, we're not anarchists, so that statement doesn't make any sense. As soon as you've built an army, you've now said government isn't always inherently evil because we need it to help us sometimes. Like I said, we don't think government is inherently evil. In fact, we don't even think we shouldn't have it. We want government. We just want limited government that doesn't initiate violence and actually enhances the lives of everyone that's involved. It says, so now it's that old joke. Would you sleep with me for $1 million? How about $1? Who do you think I am? We already decided who you are, now we're just negotiating. Like I said, he's still misunderstanding what it is to be a libertarian. We're not anarchists. We do think there should be government. We just think it should be run to enhance the lives of the people involved and protect that liberty as much as possible. 9. You say government which governs least governs best. I don't really say that necessarily, but it depends on what you mean by governs least. And that's kind of like just an idiom. But what were the Articles of Confederation? We tried that for 8 years, it didn't work, and we went to the Constitution. Well, we didn't move to the Constitution because the Articles of Confederation didn't work necessarily, and even if you could say that they didn't work, it's certainly, the reason they didn't work is not because they weren't libertarian, that they were too libertarian, you know what I mean? They came up with the Constitution as a good form of government. I don't really understand how this has to do with libertarianism. You give money to the IRS because you think they're going to hire a bunch of people that if your house catches on fire will come there with water. That doesn't make any sense. First of all, the IRS is not a necessary entity, even if you think there should be taxes. As libertarians, we think there should be government, so guess what? We think there should be taxes. Oh my God, that's not that crazy. Like I said, we're not anarchists. The thing is, the taxes should just be structured in a way so that it's not redistributing wealth. It's not taking from some people to give to others. It's not wasteful. It's performing those functions like the military, like the infrastructure, all those things that actually benefit people. If the government's structured well and it has a libertarian form of government, people will be getting more value out of that government than they're putting in taxes. The IRS has nothing to do with this. The IRS is a bloated, wasteful bureaucracy, and has nothing to do with firefighters coming to your house. That's why we pay taxes, but that's not why we have the IRS. Why is it that libertarians trust a corporation in certain matters more than they trust representatives that are accountable to voters? I don't agree with that. See, I don't think true libertarians would necessarily trust a corporation more than a representative. I think history has shown, and experience has shown, that both are people. Basically, corporations, the decisions that corporations made are made by people, whether you want to consider them a separate entity or not. And both are prone to corruption if they're allowed to get away with it. The idea that I would give up my liberty to an insurance company as opposed to my representative seems insane. It would seem insane, but you're not giving up liberty when you sign an insurance contract. It's a contract. You're willingly entered into it. If you do give up liberty, it's your choice. You alone are responsible for the terms of that contract. So it doesn't really make sense to compare that to government necessarily, where even if you do vote, you might not get the outcome that you desire. So why is it that with competition we have such difficulty with our healthcare system, and there are choices within the educational system? This is sort of like comparing apples to oranges, because there isn't really competition with the healthcare system. Go try starting a healthcare company. You'll see what I mean. And there are choices within the educational system. Depends on what you consider choices. You know what I mean? Like, there's really not. It's very structured the way you have to do it. Homeschooling is a choice, but you have to do things a very certain way to not have the state come down on you, and you still have to pay taxes to support the public school system. Would you go back to 1890? No. If we didn't have government, we'd all be in hovercrafts, and no one would have cancer, and broccoli would be ice cream? Question mark. Again, this is the confusing libertarians with anarchists. We don't want there to be no government. So no real libertarian has ever presented the idea that there would be this awesome candy land if there was no government. Those are anarchists. Those are not libertarians. Invalid question. Unregulated markets have been tried. The 80s and the 90s were the robber baron age. These regulations didn't come out of an interest in restricting liberty. What they did is came out of an interest in helping those that had been victimized by a system they couldn't fight back against. Now, I don't necessarily disagree. A lot of people who make these laws think they're doing it in the interest of preserving liberty, so he's not necessarily wrong in saying that they came out of an interest in helping those that had been victimized. But that doesn't mean that's what they're actually doing. And I don't agree that the 80s and the 90s were an example of unregulated markets. They're just, again, it's the same situation like we have now, where people are allowed to get away with doing things that are illegal. You know what I mean? So that's corruption, not really unregulation. Why do you think workers that worked in the mines unionized? And here's another just brought this up because this is another fundamental misunderstanding of libertarian ideology, is that most libertarians, myself included, would never be against a private union, because that's just simply a group of people getting together and making a choice as a group, much like people coming together and forming a libertarian government. What we are against is public unions, where they can lobby the government and everything, and they actually affect government policy, and then laws are made and things like that. But I mean, if everyone who worked for Walmart wanted to make a pact and say, we're going to strike until Walmart pays us more money, I don't care if they do that. Why shouldn't they be allowed to do that? But at the same time, Walmart should be able to say, okay, you're all fired, and hire new people if they want. And that's where you would strike that balance, because that's what libertarian government and the actual free market is all about, is an equilibrium. And when you try to affect change, when the government tries to change things, you prevent that natural equilibrium from occurring. And not forever, but you upset the balance, and then things will snap back, and it just creates all sorts of chaos. So you want a natural equilibrium. So private sector unions is fine, and people in the mines unionized for the same reason that anyone else tries to unionize, to enhance their interests in the short term, maybe to get more money. They don't care if long term it's going to have a bad effect, 2 decades or something, because they're just focused on their own interests, and that's why they unionize. So to answer the question, why did workers in the mines unionize? To try and make their lives better in the short term. Without the government, there are no labor unions because they would be smashed by Pinkerton agencies or people hired or even sometimes the government. I disagree with that. I don't think there would be no labor unions. Well, actually, yeah, without any government, maybe there would be. But like I said, I'm not against private service labor unions. So as long as you have a good system of laws like we have with the Constitution that prevents people from injuring another party, a lot of this stuff is taken care of when those laws are actually enforced and there's no cronyism and corruption, but you have to actually enforce these laws. Would the free market have desegregated restaurants in the South, or would the free market have done away with miscegenation if it had been allowed to? Would Martin Luther King have been less effective than the free market? Those laws sprung up out of a majority sense of, in that time, that blacks should not. The free market there would not have supported integrated lunch counters. Well, I don't necessarily think that's the case, because he's sort of saying that this public outcry caused a change in the laws, but the same public outcry wouldn't have caused a change in businesses, in local communities, and that doesn't really make any sense. If there's a public desire for something to happen, then that is, by definition, the free market taking over. Whether that force tries to change the laws or tries to change the businesses, that's what happens. So, I mean, I don't understand why that question doesn't really make any sense. So yes, the free market would have desegregated restaurants in the South, eventually. 19. Government is necessary but must be held accountable for its decisions. Yeah, I can't disagree with that. That's kind of what I have been talking about. Like I said, this whole thing is sort of based on his idea that we're all anarchists, which doesn't make a lot of sense, and based on an idea that freedom is defined by your ability to do things, not necessarily by a lack of physical restraint. So when you define those two things properly, a lot of these questions don't even make sense, and hopefully for some people out there that'll help explain it to you what when you're trying to figure out if something does enhance your freedoms or not. You know what I mean? So there you have it. Hope that wasn't too long.